Welcome. This is about how to be a professional, right? No, we're going to do it. My name's Linda Wayne. Dan Manning is with the Department of Agriculture, not the Department of Transportation. I apologize. We have a not the most current slide deck, but we will move forward anyhow. We'll just fix anything that we see wrong in the thing. So first I wanted to go over to you, what is professional certification? And a couple of things here. First of all, what is a profession? And we've dealt with this for years. Is GIS a profession? Is it a tool? Is it a science? And, the answer is yes. So it's basically defined as a vocation founded on specialized education training, the purpose of which is to supply services. And here are the requirements as defined by a profession. It has a specialized knowledge and skills. That was the initial effort for the UCGIS body of knowledge. Formal education, standardized code of ethics, we have that. Clients versus customers, nuance there. There is some measure of responsibility and authority, and one of the qualifying requirements of a profession is licensure or certification. So that defines a profession. Well, what is the certification? It's a process that you go through and you demonstrate your knowledge and skills for that particular profession. And it usually requires assessment based on industry knowledge, and it is a time-limited credential. It's not like, okay, we bestow upon you GISP in perpetuity. Okay, just another clarification. There's a difference between a certificate. There's a difference between a certificate and licensure. Professional certification is not a GIS certificate. That is awarded by an educational institute, and that is an educational document. It is not licensure. Licensure is managed by the state. How many of you were in the surveying discussion earlier? Okay, a few of you. Those are licensed professionals, and the reason they're licensed is there's some measure of protection of the public. There is some protection that the state has to step in an authority. So we're not a certificate, and we're not a licensure. We're professional certification. Well, why? Why have certification, right? When I started this, I wanted my grandma doing GIS. Why have a certification? Well, it does help to establish a profession. We talked earlier. It's one of those qualifying measures that says, this is a profession. And in the certification, we establish the core competencies and the ethics of the profession. It advances the profession because we all come together as professionals and we begin to shape this thing. So we start out with this idea of what is a GIS professional, but then as we build a body of professionals, that begins to shape and form what the profession is. We're adapting to new technologies and skills. The things we're doing now as GIS people versus the things we were doing 20 years ago are very, very different. This gives us that body to keep vetting the profession and keep coming through. Inform employers. It is a measure. It's something employers can use to know, there's somebody has vetted this person at some level as far as their qualifications. It also informs clients. If clients come in, they don't really know how to decide if you're a good GIS professional or not. This gives them some measure of assurance. So that's why certification. Why should you get certified? Well, there is increasing evidence that jobs descriptions are including the GISP as either required or preferred. ERISA does a survey every year, and that number is increasing every year. The same survey identified that you actually can make a little bit more money. The increased earning potential based on the salary surveys of the last two ERISA salary surveys, if you had your GISP, there was a $10,000 differential on average. And lead the profession. You are the active, I don't have too many years left here. You guys are the active participants. You're going to need to step up, shape, and maintain this profession. So that's why we need you, your input, your interest, and your activities. All right, so what's required to become certified? There are three components to certification. The first one is education, and I will just tell you briefly, basically that is the requirement is the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in GIS. And we'll talk in more detail in a minute, but it's a bachelor's degree with GIS coursework. 2, you have to take an exam, and it covers the 44 knowledge, skills, ability topics, KSAs, and if you're involved in technical operations and the development of competency models for government and assessments, you'll know what a KSA is. And then finally, you have to have some experience in the profession, and at this point, it's a minimum of 4 years experience. 4 full-time years experience as a GIS at tech or above. So let's talk a little bit about that education. You can have a degree or a certificate in anything. Well, not the certificate. You can have a master's, bachelor's, or associate's degree in any discipline. Okay? Any discipline. And or you can use your certificate of GIS. Depending on what level that degree is and what you match that degree, and then you have to have GIS coursework. So yes, you can be a master's of fine arts, but you're going to have a certain number of courses, credit hours, to make it. So that's when they say you don't need a GIS degree. That's true, but you do need GIS education. So you'll see that you have to complete the coursework, educational workshops, things like that. So the point is, the higher your degree, the less GIS specific coursework you'll have. You still have to have a significant amount. The less of a degree you have, the more the coursework you're going to have. So it's a balancing act there. You'll notice that a PhD is not on here because it is thought by the time you're going to a PhD, you are specializing in research and or education, and that is beyond what we expect for a GIS professional. You've gone into a new area at that point. You still get credit for all the classes you did as a PhD in geoscience. And then finally, the exam. Well, not finally, but the exam can be taken any time during your career. So that's kind of neat. As you just come out of school, that might be a really good time to take your exam. It is based on the knowledge areas defined by the UCGIS body of knowledge, as well as the geospatial technology competency model. Again, that's more of a practical application, a work environment model. And one sort of represents what the industry needs, and one sort of represents what the academic rigor. Now, I'm glad to present to you Dan Manning, who has actually taken the exam and is going to provide you a little insight as to what's involved.
Just to be clear, I think I'm good here now. You don't get to have anything like tested at the end of your GISP, which I'm arguing for. I think you should say I'm tested because I was such a procrastinator. I waited the whole grandfather clause period and left out. But so basically, we have a bunch of statistics on what percent of the questions are going to be on what percent of these topics. But when we talk about, foundations, what does that mean? I'm going to give you a few things. If you haven't taken GISP, this accuracy versus precision is on it. So I'm not going to beat this to death. But basically, you can see here in the top left-hand corner, that's low accuracy, low precision, right? In the bottom right-hand corner, that's high accuracy, high precision. So accuracy, if you're out there with your GPS, is when all your points are right next to each other, right? Precision is when your points are actually correct. So who talks about accuracy? You guys all do GIS, right? Who talks about accuracy and precision all day long at your normal job? Okay, so some of us do. But for a lot of us, we don't talk like this during our normal jobs. So we're going to have a little test, right? You guys look a little tired, maybe a little too much bacon here. So this is A, this is B, this is C, and this is D. And if you don't raise your hand, you automatically get the question wrong. So when you're taking GISP, you never just skip and not, got a 25% chance we pick A, right? All right. This should be easy for us, right? We're all GIS professionals. Large scale versus small scale. Do y'all talk like that at your office? This is a large scale map. So who thinks it's A? The answer. So small scale map would show large geographic area, large scale map. No one's going to participate with me. I got one participating. Who thinks it's B? Is that surprising of you, GIS professionals? Large scale map, small scale map? Again, you're probably going to have to study. This is not terminology we typically talk about.
Because at my GISP, I'm not allowed to participate.
Oh, absolutely. Are you tested?
No, I can't take the test. They won't let me. That's why I can't.
Oh, absolutely. You write the questions. That's why you're not allowed to do it. Okay. So again, these are right out of our practice exam. We're talking about database design, and when I took the test, there was a good bit of database design in it. So you got multi-editors. Two people are editing at the same time. Shapefile, personal geodatabase, KML, enterprise geodatabase, right? Hopefully that's easy for us. All of a sudden people are participating. Yep, you're right. Okay, virtualization, I can't tell you why. I gave up all my hardware to my IT department 5 years ago. Best thing I ever did. But nonetheless, for your GISP, you're going to have to know a little bit of networking generic terms. If you've been in the IT world 4 or 5 years, you're probably going to think this is pretty easy. But nonetheless, when you're studying, when you're going back and trying to figure out things you don't know, virtualization might be high on the list. You can just talk to your IT people give them a little rundown on what virtualization means to you. But when you're taking the test, and at least when I took the test, I was looking at it and thinking, this is wrong. This has got to be wrong. Okay? So right here, relational database. SQL? Anybody think that's not a relational database? Access? Anybody think that's not a relational database? So let me make sure you can't join a table and do lookup values in a different table. That's a relationship. Oracle? Anybody think that's not a relational database? PostgreSQL? So this is a great example of GISP, in my opinion, okay? We had a few people like, well, Access, and Access isn't an enterprise geodatabase, right? You're not going to have multi-people looking at it. It's hard to get more than one people look at it. If you're a shared network, that's kind of a dangerous thing to do, right? You're certainly not going to have multiple people editing. So you kind of have to back up and think, well, it is a relational database, so maybe some people wouldn't. But is it RDBMS? Well, I don't know. I asked 3 of my programmers, is it RDBMS? And I got different opinions, right? But when you're reading this question, you're kind of like, well, Access is clearly the odd man out, right? Access is the Microsoft toy that people in their infancy can build forms. So you're right. It's Access. Okay. So I'm not going to go into this. Actually, I don't think I have the right slide. But I'm going to tell you a story. So how many people, this is a how old you are test. How many people remember what year you took trigonometry? Okay. Well, there you go. So I don't remember what year I took trigonometry, but my geometry teacher was Miss Young, and I was 16, and she had just graduated college, and she was like 22. And if you were talking in Miss Young's class, we were going to talk in the hallway, Gene. I'm great at geometry. I don't know anything about trigonometry. I don't know what year I took it. I don't even know whatever. But, for the test, you're going to need to know how to do that radiant measure again. So if you don't do that in your normal day, who does radiant measure in their normal day? Not even you? Nobody? 0? You're going to have to remember some real basics. And, you can either, if you want to, remember your algebra, right? We can divide from one side, remove from the other side. You can do that. Or you can just write down 45 degree, 90 degree, 180 degree, 270 degree, and memorize it. If memory is better than algebra for you. So, if you ever apply for a job with Dan Matting, I'm going to ask you question number 37. And it's extensions of a shapefile. How many of you ever asked somebody for a shapefile and they gave you everything but the DBF file, right? Or my favorite is you always get the SHN, and you always get the SPN, but sometimes they'll leave out the SHX, right? And, the projection file, you can make that happen. You could really suffer through that, but boy, life's a lot easier if they give you the projection file, right? So if, this is Dan's little pet peeve, if you're not sending people actually, that's actually wrong. It's actually A. I shifted this around. It's A. So you got to have the SHX, you got to have the SHP, and you got to have the DBF.
It's B. It's B.
That's what I said. It's B. Should I say? It should be B. So totally, well, you passed 70 and above passing. Man, I should have hired that guy. He got the... Anyway, totally aside, not on the GSP. Doug Newcomb, are shapefiles proprietary?
Actually, yes.
That's not the right answer.
90% publicly documented.
90%. So he's got a little higher standard than I do of public record. But QGIS, read shapefile all day long?
All day long.
Every open source software that I know of can read shapefiles. I didn't get... AutoCAD loves some shapefiles. Yep. So another thing that you're going to need to know for the test, degrees, minutes, seconds, right? Divide by 60, divide by, yep, and then you add them up. There's going to be at least 2 questions on the test relating to converting decimal degrees. And for those of you that have ever started, GPS collection system, right? We're going to go get your field staff to go get GPS coordinates, or you just randomly get a table of GPS coordinates and degrees, minutes format is mixed in with decimal degrees format. Has anybody ever dealt with that? I'm alone, really? Okay. I mean, you get it all the time. So another recommendation, particularly for the geospatial recommendation, here's Dan's suggestion on the right. Assuming that you have license to ArcView, you can tell me what this looks like in QGIS, Doug. But in ArcMap, if you go to Toolbox and you go to the analysis tools, these pictures, and I'm not a huge fan of their help typically, but but these pictures are perfect. And I think on your GSP, I had at least 5 questions related to clip, cut, merge, union, intersect. So go into Toolbox, kind of remember that, and then ignore everything else on the practice exams.
So are they looking for the Esri specific one?
No, it's not Esri specific. It kind of goes back to, okay, so what routine will have a part of your input based on your mask? That kind of question. And that's a good point. So this is not an ESRI test. This is not an ESRI certification, right? So to some extent, our hands are tied, and maybe you can add into this. We can't ask you, how do you do this in ESRI software? Having said that, in my opinion, a lot of the geodatabase stuff, there are some, if Doug took the test and I asked him, Doug, did that have too much ESRI stuff in? I guarantee Doug would say yes. If you asked Dan, you said how much of it is ESI-centric, I would say less than 10%, which, if that's what you do all day, right? You're an ARC map. You got 10% of the questions, and now you got to come back to school.
Also depends on Esri specific, because there's a lot of concepts that Esri employs that are common whether you're using QGIS versus map info, and clip union intersect is a good example. It's clip's a clip whether you're in whatever software. So.
Okay, so when you leave here, I think you can come back and get this slide, and this is very specific to Dan, but root mean squares. Ironically, the Forest Service talks about root mean square a little bit. So everybody know what root mean square is? Make sure you do for the test. It's on the tests.
Those people that didn't have to digitize.
They're not. So metadata standards, ISO metadata standard is on the test. Again, things like merge and append are kind of on the test. One I'm going to go with, Doug's going to back me up here. So on the test, so who thinks a domain value is when you hit a drop down and you have options? Who thinks when you hit a drop down value, those things are called lookup? A lookup table? Any lookup table people here? Who thinks a domain is when you log into your server, your computer is on the domain? Right? Who thinks www.gisassociates.com is a domain? Like, domain's a bad word in my world. Only in the ESRI world is a domain, aka a lookup table. Nowhere else in the world. So for the purposes of your test, being GIS, a domain value is a lookup table. I saw at least 2 questions on what is surveying, what isn't surveying. In the practice exam, there's a good question about surveying. Projections, which projections distort distance, which projections distort area, is most likely going to be on your test. Data types and database fields, strings, integers, how big a number can you put in that was on my test. It may not be on yours. But I had no less than 3 GPS questions. Anybody know the GPS system for the Europeans? Galileo. How about the Russians? And Chinese? All 3 of those are going to be on the test in one form or fashion. It might be which one of these is not a GPS system, and it might list those.
That's right.
Being the federal system. GNSS. I don't know if there are always GNSSs there. And anyway, well-known IDs. I'll give you a big hint. This is a statewide, this is not a state of North Carolina test. This is a nationwide or global test. So on your state frame projections, they're not going to ask you for the well-known ID for North Carolina State Plain because 99% of people are not in North Carolina. Having said that, WGS84, what is the well-known, the 4 digit code when you do the reprojections that none of us know unless we're programmers and you're worried about web things? All right. Wow, that's not impressive.
Which projection are you looking for?
No, I'm just saying know some of your more common well-known IDs. In this case, 4326, probably going to be on your test. Topography, there's a lot of contour line kind of questions on your test because, we look at contour lines all day, but knowing topology rules is pretty important. Okay, so you guys are really lucky. You're not lucky that you got grandfathered in, but you're really lucky. When I took the test the first time, Trip, I only had the GIS body of knowledge, GIST body of knowledge. And while I agree it's a good document, it's not a study guide. And so I went through that and I tried to make it a study guide. My gosh, that was painful. But if you go to gisci.org website and then you go to study guides or whatever, there's a lot of really good information here that was not there 6-9 months ago. So my personal opinion is go take the practice exam. And after you take the practice exam without cheating, you can figure out what you need to study. And you can get a different feel on how it's well, which answer is the best answer? They might be two good answers, but this one is the best answer kind of thing. Or I could be wrong. I did pass, but I could be wrong. But when asked for list all that apply, I don't recall there being any that was only A. So when it says all that apply, it could be A, B, C, or D. It's that teacher you had. My teacher was Mr. Ackley. He was 11th grade, and he did that, which is the best answer according to Mr. Ackley. You know, it was like, ugh. But I think right now there's a lot of good stuff there. And if you just take those practice exams and you study them and you figure out where you're strong or weak, you'll save yourself a lot of time. Again, I wouldn't spend a ton of time on the GIST body of knowledge as a study guide anyway. And last but not least,
So how
of
many
you have graduated from college last
2-3 years with like a geography or GIS degree? My suggestion is do not wait. You do not have to have your 4 years experience. You do not have to have your application approved to take the test.
recently trigonometry, you recently done with this?
It's going to be a lot easier for you to do than if you're 15, 20 years old.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so, well, if you have any specific questions, that is probably the fastest exam review you're ever going to get. So thanks to Dan. I also want to throw out there one other thing. When we were developing a workshop for EURISA on how to study for the exam, one of the resources I found was Reddit. There are actually Reddit discussions that have a lot of really good information there. So let me throw that. All right, so you got your degree. Let's just get back through this process. You've got your degree. You've taken the exam. All right, what else is left? You have to do the application. And the application is a measure of how is where you send in, you document your activities. And remember, we talked about these education, experience. There's something called contributions. I referred to them early on as professional activities. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then supplemental. And I want you to note here, look how many points are in supplemental relative to everything else. Those are your flex points, okay? That because when this program was developed, there were a lot of people doing GIS who never had a GIS option in college. There were a lot of people that came into it through experience. So this is supposed to be variable to say, are you someone who has a strong education in GIS? Then you make up your extra points and your education points because you did all this great coursework and you did a thesis and you did this. Are you a person that's been working for years and have been training people? And so they're your experience points. You're going to have your basic education. You're going to have your points, but you can make up the difference in your experience points. And then also, are you a person Are you Trip and you're so active in the community that you're on the listserv every day handing out resources and information? Are you volunteering for every activity possible and you're doing all kinds of things like that in the community to help build I want you to think about contributions here for a minute because, and I'm going to do something here. That is a title I have been fighting since the day this thing. Let's do this. All right, we are a body of professionals. We have to maintain the profession. We have to engage in the profession. This is not just something that you get your degree and you walk off and do. We have to be active in it. So right here, these 8 points, do you realize that if you're just on a GIS Day committee for 4 years, you've got your contribution points? Okay, that's a pretty minimal ask there. Would you guys agree? And if you actually go out and are the chair of the committee, you only have to do that a couple of times. So it's a minimal ask for you to give back because a lot of work has been done to do this. So, but again, I wanted to emphasize here then is the idea is that there's flexibility based on how you came into this profession and it's changing. And you can make fun of the people that didn't take the test, but guess what? If we didn't have a body of professionals, we wouldn't have a body of professionals to develop the test. Right? You don't just pull a test out of the air. So a lot of work has gone into this and it's evolving and you need to be part of it to help it evolve. One last comment I'm going to make on the application. There is no need to exceed the 150 points. Okay? There are people that have turned in reams of their application. You don't get a bigger GISP. You don't get it gold or bold. You don't get a star. Right. Here's my suggestion to you. Get 200 points just in case they question something or ask her something. But once you have 200 solid points, you can stop. Okay? You don't have to put down every time you came to this conference and maybe help serve coffee. Okay? It's just not necessary. So where am I on time? So let me go down. So that's the application. We talked about that code of ethics. Oh my gosh, I don't have time here. So the code of ethics, I'll cut. So please review the code of ethics. This was developed, David DiBiase, if anybody of you know him, he's one of the education gurus of GIS. This was developed with a lot of thought, and this is about being good to your clients, being good to your employer, being good to each other. And you have to sign this to get your GISP. And here are the dollar amounts. If anybody wants to argue about that's fine, but it's $200 for your review, for your portfolio, your exam, and then the exam is $250 if you take it U.S. state side. Every year you pay $95. I tell you, I'm also a landscape member, and $95 a year is nothing. So I apologize. I wish we had more time for questions.
And do note that you get points for being at a North Carolina GIS conference. You even get points for a poster. And if there's anybody from a local government that wants to help with the smart city robots around it, I can put you on another committee to help with that.
I apologize to the next speaker.